I'm Brian from CDLAN. We come from Italy, and I'm here to tell you about a story about an experience that we had onboarding a customer. I want to give you guys some kind of like maybe some do and some don'ts and some of our experience to see, what went good, what went bad, and that kind of stuff. I am American, I talk in English, but I live in Italy, and so if I switch to Italian and I don't know it, just throw something at me. Don't worry about it. If it hits me, it's fine. So, obviously this doesn't work. Okay. Oh well. That doesn't work either. Okay. Okay, well, as I said, it's a tale of onboarding of a white label partner. No, so this is an interesting case. It was somebody who, has their own brand, has their own services, and doesn't have the infrastructure to sell cloud services, so they came to us, And the onboarding kind of went like this, it was an uphill battle, if you want to say. And some of the things that we did were, wrong, because as it started, oh, sorry, I got a couple marketing slides. I forgot about those. I stuck them in there to just tell you who is CDLAN. CDLAN is a customer, a service provider in Italy. Started out as a system integrator, became an internet service provider. In 2016, built a data center in the Caldera Park, which is like the hub of internet for Italy. Milan is the core of the internet in Italy. We're inside the Caldera Park, which is the biggest hub inside of Italy where the main internet exchanges are. The last kind of data indicated that about 60% of all internet traffic transits this data centers in the Caldera Park, so it's a pretty big deal. We also have a data center down in Rome, so we have redundancy. We have CloudStack installed in both sites, so we have multi-regions, and we were able at that point to do kind of disaster recovery services, multi-region, classic cloud stuff. So we offer services at the data center, obviously with the cloud, that's why we're here, connectivity services, voice, and cybersecurity. Marketing's done, now we can move on to something a little more interesting. Okay, so basically we had this prospect that came to us, and talked to one of our salespeople and said, wow, CloudStack looks nice. Can I sell it with my brand? And obviously, our sales guy, he's kind of famous. He said, of course you can. All sales guys will say that to you, right? But in this stage, there wasn't really, okay, well, what exactly do you mean by I want to sell it with my brand, Things can be completely different. And so what did we do? Well, we're technicians, What do technicians like to do? Oh, let me show it to you. So we did the mother of all demos. I like that Giles used the mother of before. That means he knew what it was. How many of you know what the mother of all demos was? Okay. This was done in 1968 by the Stanford Research Institute. Doug Engelbart, this guy right here, decided to show everybody what computing was and what it would be for the future. And before anything else, he wanted to demonstrate how humans could interact with computers. Okay, so we're talking about 1960. I wasn't even born. I don't know how many of you were born in 1968. But in 1968, this guy put together a demo that he did to all the Pentagon, top military brass, research institutes, universities, people that, that worked in the sector and everything. But in 1968, he had a graphic user interface. For the first time ever, showed people, that worked. He used a mouse. He did cut and paste, hypertext protocol. He did a video call in 1968. All of that stuff, for like 15 years, nobody knew existed. Until, Commodore 64 Macintosh came out and started doing things in the early 80s. In 1968, this was like, nobody knew what he was talking about. Well, that's exactly what happened when we did the mother of all demos, CloudStack, to a customer that had no idea what CloudStack was. We took them in, showed them all the interfaces, and you could do, the networking, all this kind of stuff, and, the guys were on the other side going, oh, wow, okay, great, all right. After a couple hours, we got it all done, and they're like, whoa, wow, man, this is real powerful, okay. So then what happened? Okay, well, let's do some calls and talk about it. And we ended up in the tunnel of endless meetings, one after another, and we would finish one, start another one, and there would be somebody new because they didn't understand something, so they brought a new guy from another team in, so then we would have to restart again. So we were explaining the same things over and over, with the different people that would come. And it was like an endless loop. I mean, it was really, we were in this tunnel and we couldn't get a way out. It was just terrible. And so what we did, I decided that, why we were doing this. Well, large multi-team meetings, they just don't work. People don't understand what you're talking about from one group to the another. You have technical people, you have business people, you have marketing people, you have all this kind of stuff, and it just doesn't work. And the prospect doesn't know CloudStack. So you're saying things that he doesn't understand. He doesn't know what a pod is, right? So when you're talking about this, they don't know. And the other thing is, not knowing, CloudStack, they don't really have a business model defined. They don't really know exactly what they want to do. Okay, we want to sell cloud. Okay, what do you mean by cloud? What is cloud for you? Because everybody just, says cloud's something different, And then, some people would say, I just want to sell a single VM. And other guys would say, no, we want to sell a virtual data center. And it was all a big confusion. And white label means something different to everybody else. Okay, I can put your brand on the login on the CloudStack page, and you resell my services. For me, that's a white label. All my service offerings that you're reselling. Different is I want to do my own service offerings. And so here, it got even more intricate and confusing because this prospect has their own portal where they're selling services to their users. So they want to integrate CloudStack into that portal. They also have resellers. So we're not talking about a single level white branding. We're talking about, he's got white branding inside his services, And the prospect's also an ISP. So he has his own internet services, he has his own IP addresses, and he wants to use all that. So that white label for him means I can't see anything of the CDLAN infrastructure, okay? So, but all this came out like afterwards, So what did we have to do? Well, we had to start talking the same language. We had to break the loop, So we had to divide up into specific meetings, a specific meeting business to business, where you talk about exactly what do you want to sell and how do you want to sell it, with the people that decide how they want to sell it, or what they want to sell, But high level, not going deep into tech. Because if you go deep into tech, those salespeople, they don't know what you're talking about, We had to have the system admin to system admin, people that are going to work on the system, and the nitty gritty, the people that are here, We had to have that kind of meeting to talk about, how it works really, underneath. But then there's also the development guys, They're the guys that have to do the integration with the APIs. They're the guys that, and there, get into language. Oh, our portal's in PHP, we want to use PHP. Well, geez, you guys, there's a whole bunch of tools already made for CloudStack. Why don't you use those? Oh, but we don't know those. We can't integrate those. All that kind of talk that has to be done. Billing, how are we going to get the billing records, from CloudStack for our system? Because on our portal, they have to see, be billing, has to be done there, And the network, how can we integrate this stuff? Those are completely different conversations. And if you don't break them down, you're just going to create confusion. And it's just going to become that tunnel of endless discussion. No decisions get made. And so this is, what we tried to do is break it down. Okay, technical discussions, but we're going to talk about network, just the network people. Don't have the other guys in there. It's just going to create confusion. So then what did we do? Okay, we decided, they want to do their, their own kind of networking thing. So we set it up. Basically, this is, what the realization came to be. There's an NNI interface, network-to-network interface between our network and their network. Redundant, obviously, with different POPs, and we're connecting to them. So they're all internet service with their white label, partners are connected to, or the end users could come off the internet, but it all goes into their network. Then all that traffic to get to our cloud platform comes in off these NNI connections, okay? So once we have these NNI connections, then it comes into our network. And so, we have an MPLS-enabled network, so we have all the MPLS connections that take the traffic from their network and bring it to the CloudStack, okay? So we had to create networking ports for them into the CloudStack with dedicated VLANs, because obviously they wanted to sell different types of services. This is the public one with the public IP addresses. This is another VLAN for, we have a customer that wants a private cloud that we're going to give them a direct connection and all this kind of stuff. So we had the trunk port that we set up with them, with the different VLANs. It would have been really nice here to already have the service features that we could get in some of them that Giles talked about before, the routing directly on the VNF, to have the EPN, VPN would have been really cool with the VXLAN to port it right into, but we're on 419 still. So it was not possible. It would have been really great to do this with a more modern version of CloudStack. It would have eliminated some of the problems that we've gone and had to face with the customer on that. So for this type of project, if somebody has one, I would suggest taking a look at, the moving into a 420 or 421 when it comes out type of a solution, because it could drastically simplify your setup on the networking side. So then what happens? Well, it gets really kind of complicated when you bring the network inside then of CloudStack, And when you're talking to them, shared networks, isolated networks, the customer doesn't understand that. The customer doesn't understand, the VNF part, doesn't understand the limitations that you would have inside of CloudStack. Okay, I have a network, okay, because he has a setup where, okay, we've created domain for the reseller, and he's created subdomains, and he's created projects inside the subdomains, trying to limit his customers and whatnot. But trying to get, a one network that could be seen by different projects inside a subdomain, it gets really difficult inside of CloudStack. And this was the main problem that we had setting up with the customer, is this type of explanation, trying to get him to understand how networking works inside of CloudStack. This is probably, for this type of scenario that we're doing, the hardest part that we had to really discuss with the customer, because then what happens? Okay, well, how do you do it? Well, we use the VNF, it's integrated in that, we have the addresses on there, the separation, then you have the NAT, and whatnot that's being done on the VNF service. But the customer says, oh, but we want to give the public IP address directly to the VM, Oh, because we do VoIP services, we sell IPv6s to customers. They have to have the IP address directly on, okay, all right. Well, so then you have to have the shared VLAN, the layer 2 that comes out, Oh, well, but then what happens to the security? Well, if you're signing the IP addresses from your device, you have to do it on your device, the security. CloudStack doesn't even see those IP addresses. He doesn't know about it. And then the customer goes, oh, well, then how do I do that? I don't know. What are you going to put in there? What kind of security services can you put on your device? I don't know. That's a tough discussion to have with your customers, because, they may not know. It's like, oh, you start talking about, oh, well, ARP filtering, ARP guard, static ARP, or that way nobody can rob the IP addresses from the other side, because I have one shared VLAN that different VMs can see. I mean, it gets really complicated. Trying to get them to use that VNF model. This is where, like, the layer 3 would have been very helpful, on a 420 type of service, where I could do dynamic BGP directly on a VNF and send it out to them and maintain some of the security inside of CloudStack that I can't do with the 419. That would have been very helpful. That's one of the main reasons before when I said, this type of service that's doing the setup would have been really nice to have had the 420. That's something that, don't overlook it. It's really complicated. Customers, expect that you give them the solution, but I can't give you the solution for your device. I can say on CloudStack, you can, enable security service for the MAC address at that point, but how can I do it for the IP address if he doesn't, CloudStack doesn't even know the IP address, because you're assigning it in DHCP from your device. He sees a VLAN. On that VLAN, he doesn't know the IP address that gets sec to the machine. I can't create firewall rules without the VNFs. And so this was probably the hardest part. That first part of setup was the easy part. Once we started coming in to working inside CloudStack, that's where things got difficult, and the conversations with the customer were, I don't want to say heated, but there's some misunderstanding. Like where does CloudStack end and where do I begin? Where's that demarcation point? That's not something that, is easy. Well, you're selling me the service, you can tell me how to do it. I don't know what you're using for a device to assign the IP addresses and what type of security services you can offer with that device. Because there is where you need to look, not inside of CloudStack. So then they decided to do some with the VNFs because that way they could have more security control, you know. But this was a change that we had to get them to do. It wasn't something, you know, that they were natively, if you want to say, it wasn't natively appealing to them. You know, they wanted each server has its own IP address. Then once you start talking about, well, you know, in the cloud services with the IP address on the VNF, you have the segregation, you know, there's a lot more security, and you can do like, you don't have to have that necessarily then one IP address for every machine. You know, you can have one IP address for the service that you're doing, not necessarily the machine. So there are, you know, some advantages to doing the VNF, and you have to explain that to the customer because otherwise, you know, for them it's real difficult. So this was where we, you know, had a lot of discussions, and it was one of the pain points, if you want to say, about this. And it's all because the customer doesn't understand the networking that's inside. You know, they don't know. You know, you have to explain it to them. You know, you're talking to a guy who his networking he's an internet service provider. He has routers, he has fiber connections, and he knows that part. He doesn't know anything about what happens inside CloudStack. And you send them the documentation. Well, read up on this, and they don't read it. You know, they come back to you and say, hey, okay, you fix it. You know, you're my supplier. I'm paying you for it, right? You know, that's the kind of attitude that comes out of this type of a solution, you know. So, and then we got into, you know, the part of provisioning, you know. And here's, you know, another thing, you know, your customer has ideas. Your customer has ideologies, you know, to how he wants to build things that he doesn't really necessarily know in terms of CloudStack, you know. So this is what we ended up doing, and what, you know, what they wanted, that their customer goes on to their customer portal and buys the solution, okay. This was hard to, okay, what do they buy? You know, do they buy resources and then it's pay as you go? You know, is it just pay as you go? Do they buy the single VMs from you? You know, what do they buy? You know, that was a hard discussion to have with the customer. You know, and in the end, it was like, well, you know, cloud is pay as you go. If you really want to do cloud, they just you activate their services, and if they buy something on CloudStack with the billing, then it comes down via API to your system, and you build the client. And that's finally what we were able to convince them to do, because, you know, in the beginning it was like, no, they have to buy the VM. Okay, well, they buy the VM. Okay, it gets activated. 3 months later, they need more RAM. They're going to buy that from you. They can't do that on the CloudStack portal, so they're going to have to go to you, provision the RAM. And then, you know, I mean, it gets more complicated. You know, walking the customer through that is not something that they're not used to. You know, an ISP necessarily isn't used to selling cloud services. It isn't used to, you know, knowing how they work. And so helping them identify that. And so in the end, basically, you know, on their portal, the customer activates the, if you want to say, CloudStack instance, if you want to call it like that, and then everything is pay as you go. So they come in on the customer portal, they create their user, they give a usage limits, you know, so they can sell, you know, okay, you can't get more than X CPU, X RAM, or disk space, or whatever. So that gets set. So they give a global limit to the customer, but then everything that he buys inside of that is, you know, pay as you go. But then what happened? Okay, all right, so you have this, and they started playing around with it, and they said, well, geez, when I'm in CloudStack, I can, as an admin, I can destroy anything. You're an admin. That's how things work, right? No. Well, I don't want my customer to be able to destroy a domain that I created for him. Okay. Any special reason? Well, because if then they destroy it, then it's a problem for me. They're going to call me and say, oh, I made a mistake and I destroyed everything. It's like, well, okay. You know, they say, are you sure? You know, there's all that, but no. And so we had to create personalized roles for them. We create personalized roles so their domain admins, you know, when they activate the subdomain for their reseller, they have custom roles so that these people cannot destroy the domain. We had to make this for them so that to destroy it, they have to go to their portal. Well, if they can destroy it from yours or destroy it from CloudStack directly, what's the big difference? If you can destroy it, you can destroy it. Where I destroy it and how I destroy it, does that really matter? For them, it did. Why? have no idea. No? So we had to do this for them, you know. And so these kind of things are, you know, that come up during your project, you know, not having them really defined in the beginning, it, you know, can kind of create some issues and slow down the project. This is a project that we started just about after the CloudStack Madrid, more or less, you know, and it's going to go live next month. You know, so we're talking about months and months of doing something that should be really simple, you know, because it became overly complex, you know. So after the customer buys it, then what happens? So then he goes onto their customer portal and he clicks on the management. Management opens up a branded instance of the CloudStack interface for them. So their customer sees their logo, their brand and everything, and does the part of the management. But then one thing was, well, you know, we want our customers to be, you know, it's a single sign-on, right? They come and log into our portal and then automatically log into the other one. Well, you know, and then you start looking into some single sign-on and how it works inside CloudStack, okay? When you activate single sign-on in CloudStack, it's a global feature. It's not per domain. So if you activate it, you know, it gets activated. You can disable it for a single domain. But at that point on the interface, I have, you know, when I log in, I have the domain sections and I see all the domains of all the different customers. Oh, you can't do that, right? I don't want my customer to log in that has to log into my domain and see the other domains. Well, that's how CloudStack works, you know. You know, so this kind of personalization is something that you have to look into with the customer, you know. Or you're going to go then to kind of more of an LDAP or, you know, two-factor authentication external or something to be able to manage this type of a service. Because, you know, the customer expects this, but, you know, how to integrate that is not something, you know, that everything has its, if you want to say, pros and cons, right? You know, so when you're doing something, you know, explaining to them, okay, well, if you do it this way, it has, you have this type of result. You know, so this was something that we had to discuss with the customer. Billing, all this is gets really interesting, you know, because what do you have? You have a developer who says, all right, I have a domain, API. On that domain, give me all the resources that are underneath it. Well, CloudStack's billing API doesn't work that way. You know, yeah, billing, subdomains, projects. If you query one domain that has a bunch of subdomains and a bunch of projects inside those subdomains, it's not going to return all the records for all of those. So it gets more complicated. You know, so the expectations that the customer has is, oh, I queried the API and I don't have the billing records. It doesn't work. You know. It's like, well, no, you're not doing it correctly. So you have to work with them. In the end, we ended up writing the billing code for them and sending it to them. Do it this way and it works. Oh, yeah. Because by themselves, their expectations with the development was something different than what actually happened. So as I'm kind of running out of time, you know, just some of the problems, you know, that we faced. Well, you know, what does the customer want to sell? Main point, you know. And how does it map to CloudStack? You know, those are discussions that need to be done in the beginning. If they're not done in the beginning, you're just going to talk about it for months. That's what we did. We talked about it for months. You know, defining the terms, you know, the CloudStack terms, you know, a domain, a subdomain, a pod, you know, those kind of features, a shared network, isolated network, VNF, all those things have to be defined with the customer so that when you say something, they know what you're talking about. And when they say something, you know what they're talking about. Because otherwise, your terms don't match and you think you've just, given them the correct message and they've interpreted it as something else. So, the different programming models and schemes with the devs, that was a kind of a big issue, you know. We had issues like, oh, well, you know, I'm doing my calls from my software in PHP and it's not logging me in. They're laughing because, you know, we were in the call together, you know, and our guy's going, well, geez, I'm calling that with Postman with the credentials you gave me and it works. No, it doesn't work. I don't know what to tell you. You know, we're doing it and it works. No, it doesn't work, you know. And then another guy goes, let me try in Postman. Oh, those credentials do work, but maybe it's a problem on our app. But these kind of things, you know, we don't know what they're using. We try to tell them, look, you know, CloudStack's got, you know, all kinds of tools to develop on top of it. Why don't you use those? They're already done. You know, It's got the SDKs, it's got the, what do they call, the Cloud Monkey CLI, you know, I mean, it's got all these things that you can use to integrate with CloudStack. Why are you going to do it all, you know, by, you know, use some of the tools, but, you know, the customers might not want to do that. And this is something that gets down to the next point. Developing with the APIs means that you know CloudStack. If you don't know CloudStack, you cannot use the APIs. You won't understand them. You think something's going to happen and something else happens, because CloudStack works like this. And to use the APIs, you have to have an understanding of CloudStack. That's what the tools are for, to take that away from you. You know, Giles mentioned it, you know, with the new development, you know, for the plugins. It's exactly the same thing. If you use the APIs, you have to know CloudStack. If you don't know CloudStack, using the APIs is hard. Okay. Defining the networks and services. I talked about this quite a bit because it was one of the main points that we had. You know, we needed really to define those. The single sign-on. But the main problem is you have somebody, I'm a customer, I'm paying you, tell me how to do it. Well, I can't tell you how to do something that I don't know exactly what you want to do. You know? And that was one of the key sticking points. You know? So these are some of the problems we faced, the lessons we learned. I hope it's helpful for you if you ever find somebody that wants to do this. Don't make our mistakes. Do it, you know, define the things and work better from the beginning. So this is the end. We got them onboarded. It's wicked comedy, but it was fun, and it was, you know, had some laughs. Postman works and your API doesn't. So I hope you enjoyed it, and that's it for me.